Picture this, an army standing in perfect formation in the Chinese city of Xi'an. We're talking 8,000 soldiers, infantry, cavalry, the whole deal. But here's the thing, none of these soldiers are flesh and bone. They're all made of clay, a silent, powerful guardian army built for the afterlife. This entire massive project was for one man, a man who believed he had conquered everything under heaven, and he was planning on taking his army with him. And that man's name was Qin Shi Huang, the very first emperor of China. He's a fascinating figure, you know, part unifier, part tyrant. He left such a huge mark on his nation that some people think the name China actually comes from his dynasty, the Qin. So in this explainer, we're going to dive deep into the man, his methods, and the absolutely monumental legacy he left behind. All right, so let's start our investigation at his final resting place. A tomb so ridiculously vast, archaeologists are still uncovering it today. And right at the heart of it all is the part everyone knows, his silent ceramic army. I mean, the sheer scale and detail here are just breathtaking. You've got 8,000 life-size soldiers, and even though they were built from modular parts, kind of like ancient building blocks, every single one has a unique face. And get this, it wasn't just soldiers. He had a whole entourage for the afterlife, complete with acrobats, entertainers, and even animals. This project was so enormous it might have taken more than 500,000 workers to build. This wasn't just a tomb. This was a statement of absolute, unquestionable power. So you have to ask, right? Who was the kind of man who could command a project like this? Well, to understand him, you have to understand the world that made him, an empire that was literally forged in fire. For centuries, China was completely fractured. It was called the Warring States period, and the name says it all, just constant, brutal war between rival kingdoms. Then, in 221 BCE, the state of Qin, led by the man who would become emperor, just conquered everyone else. In a blistering 9-year campaign, he ended centuries of division and gave himself a brand new title, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. Now, to lock down his rule, he knew military power wasn't enough. He needed a good story, so he declared he had the mandate of heaven, basically saying, hey, the gods themselves want me in charge. And to make that divine right something you could actually see and touch, he had a massive piece of jade carved into the heirloom seal of the realm. It was the ultimate symbol of God-approved power, one that would be passed down for centuries. But you know, saying the gods are on your side only gets you so far. To hold this massive new empire together, he needed a system, a whole philosophy based on absolute, total control. So at the time, you had philosophies like Confucianism, which believed that people are fundamentally good. But Qin Shi Huang, nah. He went with a much, much darker worldview called legalism. Legalism's core idea is that people are inherently selfish, chaotic, and just can't be trusted. The only way you can keep society from falling apart is with super strict, unforgiving laws and really harsh punishments for everyone, no exceptions. It's a pretty grim way of looking at the world. And that philosophy drove him to standardize, well, pretty much everything. He was like one legal code for everybody, a single system of governors running things, one written language so his laws could be read everywhere. He even standardized the length of axles on carts, which sounds minor, but it was a stroke of genius. It meant any cart could travel on any road, completely changing the game for trade and moving troops. This was control right down to the tiniest detail. Now, all this standardization and control definitely brought unity, no question. But it came at a terrifying price. And this is where we get into the really dark side of his legacy. To make sure there were no competing ideas, Qin Shi Huang launched one of history's most infamous book burnings. He went after rival philosophies, poems, and especially the histories of all the kingdoms he'd just conquered. The only books that were spared were practical ones, stuff about medicine, farming, or predicting the future. Basically, he wanted history to start with him. And the punishment for disagreeing with him was just absolute. We're not talking a slap on the wrist. If you criticized the emperor, the law said your entire family would be killed. Even just owning a banned book could get you tattooed and shipped off for forced labor on the Great Wall. This was the brutal reality of his vision. And it wasn't just books he destroyed. According to one early historian, he had 460 scholars buried alive. Now, were they scholars who defied his book burning? Were they alchemists who failed to make him immortal? We don't know for sure, but the act itself is just a chilling example of his paranoia and his cruelty. And here's the ultimate irony. For a guy who completely reshaped a nation, his biggest fear was his own death. He got obsessed with finding the elixir of life, paying alchemists a fortune for their potions. The tragic twist? These elixirs were often loaded with mercury. His frantic search to live forever is the very thing that poisoned and killed him. He died at just 49 years old. So think about that. The man survived multiple assassination attempts, only to be killed by his own fear of dying. And while the emperor himself was gone, the empire he built, well, that was just getting started, leading to his final and most lasting legacy. And this, right here, is the central paradox of his entire rule. His own dynasty, the Qin dynasty, it barely outlived him. It collapsed just a few years after he died. But the imperial system he designed, that centralized government, the standardized writing, the whole idea of a unified China, that lasted for 2,000 years. He built something way more permanent than his own family line. So how are we supposed to judge a guy like this? For centuries, thanks to the dynasty that came after him, he was painted as a straight-up, bloody-minded villain. But today, historians see it as a bit more complicated. I mean, nobody denies he was a tyrant, but his actions are now often put in the context of his time. And the conversation has shifted. People now ask, were his brutal methods a kind of necessary evil to pull a unified nation out of centuries of chaos? And that really brings us to the final haunting question of his legacy. Was he a paranoid tyrant who crushed culture and freedom? Or was he a ruthless visionary who did what had to be done to create one of the world's most enduring civilizations? The question isn't just about him. It's a question we still wrestle with all the time. Does the goal of unity ever justify the methods of brutality?